Okay, I've got 2 minutes after the top of the hour, so maybe we should go ahead and get started. First of all, just to say welcome to everyone who's come along to join us for the Center for Blood Research and the School of Biomedical Engineering Research Day for 2021. My name is Dana Devine, and I'm the director of the Center for Blood Research. And I would just like to say thank you again for joining us. And I have also some words of welcome from the director of the School of Biomedical Engineering, is Peter Zanstra, and he's asked me to just read the following. So he said, hello everyone, and welcome to the third annual CBR-SBME Research Day. This is the third year that the School of Biomedical Engineering has participated in the CBR-SBME Summer Studentship Program. And the second year that this Research Day event has been virtual. We're here today to celebrate the work of 37 summer students. So we'd like to thank them for their work over the past few months and congratulate you on your accomplishments. We look forward to seeing where your career takes you next. So I think those very appropriate words, and we are going to hear about what all the exciting things of how I spent my summer time went for everyone today. And I'm going to turn this over to, I think, Stephanie as slide controller. Could we have the next slide? Okay, I am going to make just a land acknowledgement statement. I'm currently sitting on the campus, so I am on the lands of the unceded lands of the Musqueam, and I'm sure that most of you are here either coming from your home, which would put you on unceded territories of the Squamish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, or the Musqueam. And I would like to just acknowledge that we are on their lands, and we are appreciative of the care that those peoples have given to our beautiful city over the years and to the lands that we share with them. So Stephanie, do you want to flip slides again? Okay, so I'm just to walk you very briefly through the agenda. We're going to have a keynote presentation from Dr. Jennifer Willet, and Stephanie will introduce her. We're then going to have a very brief break, so you can just go, refresh your coffee and tea and come running right back. We'll then have a first session of summer student presentations. Then we'll take a slightly longer break, so you get a half an hour off for lunch. And then we will come back for the other half of the summer student presentations. And then at the end of the day, we have some awards to make. We have our Neil Mackenzie Mentorship Excellence Awards, Summer Student Awards, and just a couple of quick closing remarks from me. So without further ado, Stephanie, I will turn this over to you. You're still on mute. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this one. Christina.
Great. Just wanted to let everyone know that you can engage with us on social media. We'll be doing event live tweets throughout the day for event highlights and program highlights. So be sure to follow us there and take us on social media with your experiences. Thanks. Back to you, Stephanie.
Dean. All right. I'm excited to introduce this year's Research Day keynote speaker. Dr. Jennifer Willet is a Canada Research Chair in Art, Science, and Ecology, and a professor in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. She completed her PhD in the Interdisciplinary Humanities program at Concordia University in Montreal and has taught at her alma mater as well as at the Arts and Genomics Center at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. Dr. Willet is also an internationally successful artist and curator in the emerging field of bioart and has exhibited in New York, Montreal, the UK, and Australia, to just name a few places. Her work resides at the intersection of art and science and explores the notions of representation, the body, ecologies, and interspecies interrelations in the biotech field. In 2009, she opened the first BioArt Lab in Canada called INCUBATOR Lab, which is a hybrid art science research laboratory and studio in downtown Windsor. And today, she'll be sharing with us the radical interdisciplinarity in the arts and sciences and how this plays into her work at the INCUBATOR Art Lab. So Dr. Willet, the virtual stage is all yours now.
Thank you so much for having me. I would like to thank the center for hosting me. It is my pleasure to be here. I love speaking with students. I love speaking with scientists and medical students, people who are going into scientific fields, because we have a lot in common and a lot that we do very differently. So what I want to do today is I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, there it goes. I'm going to show you my presentation. I'm going to speak for about 25 minutes and then we'll have 10 minutes for questions or comments. I've set a timer on my phone, but Stephanie, if you feel that I'm going over, give me the signal, okay? So today I'm here to talk to you about radical interdisciplinarity in the arts and sciences. I think this is a really exciting sort of new field, and I think it's really something that the younger generation of scientists and medical practitioners are open to. I am here today. Oh, let's see, good. Why am I here today? Because I'm an artist, but I was invited to come based on this talk. Some of you, the coordinators, heard this talk that I gave for the Art Gallery of Windsor, and it was an interview, and they titled it, "This is BioArt's Moment." And so I'd like to say that at this moment in time during the pandemic, our discussion around science and technology and medicine has hit mainstream, right? And the sort of like ebb and flow and metaphors that we use, the language we use, the politics that around those discussions has become key. So this is a moment for artists working in my field who already use cells and enzymes and viruses in the production of artwork to really communicate with mass audiences and to help contribute towards the effort of dealing properly with COVID-19. The other reason why I think I'm invited here, and one of the things that I think that I'll be focusing on for the next couple of years in my own research is just how much we've learned over this last couple of years about the limits of what science can do or how it moves through our society. I think we are all here big fans of scientific research methodologies. From my perspective, I would argue it is one of the strongest form of human knowledge that we're able to produce. It has advanced the human lifespan, it has increased the quality of life. But what we're learning is through this experience is we're learning the limits of contemporary science and contemporary medicine. We're learning that scientific data alone is not enough. We are learning that we need to learn how to communicate that data to more general audiences. We need to engage in more informed public debate around science and medicine. We're also learning that science and medicine and the data produced alone, although it produces excellent repeatable results, the notion that those results are objective is proving itself to not necessarily be true. We're learning that quite often science and the data produced in that environment come from colonial traditions that exhibit things like racism, sexism, homophobia in the types of data that's produced or in how that data is deployed. So we need to also really maybe give up this notion that science is purely objective data and think about ways that not only could it be communicated, but could research happen in more entangled ways with human communities, with social groups, with thinkers from different fields that would allow for those questions to be part of the scientific process. So today, what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about how science is not only responsible for the data it produces, but it also needs to engage with the hearts and mind of people. It needs to engage with our political system. It needs to acknowledge the social impacts of scientific research and the data produced. It needs to go beyond producing repeatable results towards addressing some of the sort of larger social concerns that science may also be involved in reproducing. So it is no longer happening in a vacuum. It is, and we need to consider together, as you are the next generation of practitioners in these fields, how can we roll things out differently? How can we communicate about science differently? How can we perform science differently? And from my perspective, I would argue, and the argument I'm here to make today, is that we need to consider breaking down the disciplinary silos between the arts and the sciences and the humanities and the social sciences. And we need to allow scientific processes and medical practices to happen in chorus and in collaboration and be affected by and in conjunction with these other fields. Better keep going on time. So let me tell you a little bit about my work. So I'm an artist. I have been working for over 20 years in a field called bioart. And bioart is a field where artists engage in the tools and technologies and the living media of the biological sciences, biotechnology, also the ecological sciences, but towards the production of art rather than the production of science. So I've been sort of tinkering in labs. I've shadowed many scientists over the years. I embedded myself in different labs, and eventually I built my own lab so that I could do this work. This is a piece from 2012, which is seminal to my practice, called Biotechnology is a Technology of Love. And I've been thinking a lot about, in my own lab and in my own practice, the type of care and mutual relationship that I have with the other organisms in the lab, and the care and mutual relationship I have with the other humans in my lab, and how we could reposition our relationship with those other actants in that space as one that involves the notion of love. And I don't mean romantic love, I don't mean romance novel love, I mean love in terms of durational respect, reciprocity, care, communication, love as a way of understanding how we can co-determine the outputs that happen in a lab, humans and non-humans in that space. I do a lot of wacky stuff. I should tell you, I have a real sense of humor. I'm not as serious as I sound. So this is a piece that I did in 2016 called the Great Lakes Algae Organ. And this piece is a bicycle propelled street organ based on a Dutch street organ that is also a portable lab and a home for an algae colony. I grow spirulina algae in there, and I provide it everything it needs. I provide it nutrients, I provide it light, I provide it agitation through these beautiful tubes on the front, but I also provide it entertainment. So it has like a music box on the top and plays silly music for the algae. This also becomes a science communication tool, right? Children come running at me when they see me riding this thing. People want to talk about algae and look at my microscopes. So using maybe the skills that artists have can be a wonderful way to get people's guards down and get them having fun and getting them actually engaging hands-on in science and technology. This is another series I did most recently in 2009. This is a piece called Baroque Biology Paper Theater, and it's a series of photographs of Petri dishes. And the Petri dishes, I think of them as little theaters where we're doing performances using GMO bacteria. So the bacteria in these spaces is genetically modified to express different colors. And then that bacteria is working in conjunction with the other actants that I put into the stage. And my idea is to think a little bit about somehow right outside of science, we think of the living organisms within a lab as separate from the ecology that we share our planet with. But actually, I would argue that we all are metabolically, but also like socially, ideologically interconnected. And so a lot of the work I've been working on more lately is helping regular people think about the organisms of science and the biotech world as part of the organisms that we might apply sustainability or conservation goals or animal research ethics goals to, in a way that we think about the outdoor ecology or our pets or those types of things. So a lot of my work is about breaking down the boundaries between these different genres of relationships we have with other organisms on the planet. This is from the same series. So what I would do is I work with my team and we grow these beautiful little Petri dishes in the lab, and then we set them up into displays, and then we photograph them in the lab. And then I print and exhibit the photographs. I have exhibited the Petri dishes live before, but it takes a lot of biosafety negotiation in order to get my Petri dishes into a gallery. So since the pandemic, we've all been working from home. And I just wanted to show you a couple pieces I developed during this time. This is a piece called COVID Suit. Although I have to say I've nicknamed it COVID Suit Mom. Like a lot of people in this room, I suspect I have children, or I'm also a caregiver. I'm sure lots of people here are dealing with care in the home. And during the time of the pandemic, the boundaries between domestic labor and the labor that I do in the lab have really collapsed. So what I did is I decided to start making work during this time that reflected maybe some of the anxiety and the fears that I had as an individual, but also particularly as a mother at home with small children during a lockdown. So this suit here is a hazmat suit that I happened to have in my basement during the first lockdown. I have very unusual items in my possession regularly for my art practice. And I started decorating it with patterns. This is the COVID-19 pattern on the back. There's like a really big diagram of the virus. And then I put all sorts of reflective stickers and decorative stickers all over it. And then I convinced my kids to put on rain slickers and run around the neighborhood with me. And we have done a whole bunch of photographs, but we also did a beautiful video work that we're editing right now that we'll be exhibiting shortly. Then I started thinking about how to do virtual bioart and virtual performances online. So I did a lot of like at-home workshops where I was showing people how to do bioart in their kitchens. This is one that I did for the MIT Media Lab. They did a Global Community Bio Summit, which is an annual meeting of DIY biotech practitioners. And they had me come in and I did a performance piece for them called Gratitude for the Organisms. And what I actually did is I negotiated with my university to go into my lab, even though it was closed, and late at night. And I did this beautiful sort of poetic offering to all the organisms in the lab that maybe work on our behalf towards advancing scientific research. I also acknowledged all the organisms that in my lab we had to put down in order, because we had to close the lab during for a period of time. And it was intended as like a really evocative, transformative moment during an otherwise very technical conference. So I would say that one of my artistic strategies is to go places where I don't belong. I often find myself in conferences or events or in buildings or environments that are not really designed for me. And then I find sort of sneaky and ingenious and funny and self-deprecating ways to make myself at home there and to meet the people there and learn from them and share with them what I have to learn or to teach. So I want to tell you a little bit about my lab. So I'm a faculty member in the School of Creative Arts at the University of Windsor, and we have a new custom-built facility that is an old armories building that has been redesigned into an art department. They kept the historical facade, but inside there's a second building, a hyper-modernist building inside of this old building. And my lab, this is the BioArt Lab, the Incubator Art Lab, BioArt Lab, is in the front entranceway of the building. So you walk in through the front door, you can see an art gallery and an atrium, and you turn to your left and you can see directly through these floor to ceiling windows into my lab. My lab is a BSL level 2, so it's a biosafety level 2 lab. In that environment, it's a mixed use laboratory. So we do work with microbes, we do some GMO work, we do some tissue culture and tissue engineering. We do everything at sort of like educational grade or graduate student grade level, but it allows us to create artworks in that space. We use this space also as a workshop environment, so people who maybe are not from the sciences can come in and try. Like we did some CRISPR workshops last year where we had people from the general public coming in and learning more about CRISPR and how it worked, and they were altering yeast using that technology. But the next thing that this lab is going to do is it also becomes a theater, like a performance art venue for BioArt. So we're just purchasing right now equipment from a CFI grant to wire this for multimedia. There'll be theatrical lighting, sound, video projections, all sorts of things that will allow us to do live BioArt performances. So I'm sort of thinking about doing something like Bill Nye the Science Guy mixed with Cirque du Soleil, or like BioArt opera. So I imagine someone singing in the corner in a fabulous costume while people are cloning DNA like crazy in a PCR machine. And maybe there's video of that being projected on the wall. So again, creating these unexpected magical moments where people engage with science and art and are kind of like caught off guard with the delight and the interest and want to learn more. I will say that my goal is to increase science communication, but it's also to increase audiences for contemporary art. In recent years, as the debates around science have become more politicized around notions of ecology and environmental degradation, I find that the science no longer has the highest sort of respect in our mainstream culture. But contemporary art has been in that position for a long time. Lots of people sort of worry and think that maybe we're a waste of money or we're a little unusual. And so I find that the tools that I use to promote art and the tools I use to promote science are quite effective across both fields. This is our lab. We use it in a variety of different ways. This is my team. I have a team that I have on and off over 10 years. We've had multiple people. Usually right now we're up around 10 or 11 people at any given time. I hire scientists, I hire artists. I have a philosopher right now. I've had students who came to work from us from social work. So the team is radically interdisciplinary. I hire for diversity, and I hire for cultural diversity. I hire for gender diversity, but I also hire for various ages and various backgrounds. Research and knowledge backgrounds. And I do that because I think it's important that we move towards a society where in hierarchical academic environments, diversity is celebrated, but I also do it because it improves my research. Having all of these different perspectives at the same table really helps me produce to myself think outside of the box and be exposed to ideas that are not coming from my origin point. We have an MFA program, so that's a Master in Fine Arts. It is a terminal degree in my field, so you do not need a PhD to teach in fine arts. However, I have one, a lot of artists do. But the artists that come and study with us quite often have some bio-art experience, and then they come and work and train in the lab and learn a lot more experience, and then they produce their own artworks and become professional artists upon graduation. I also have an undergraduate class called BioArt, Contemporary Art in the Life Sciences. And this class it's a visual arts class. So all the students in the class make visual arts projects. They write papers about visual artists who are working in the BioArt genre. But I open registration. So that means I have students from all different fields in my class. I get a lot of science students, a lot of nursing students. And some of them, we invite them for the class, but then maybe they end up working for us for a couple of years, or they volunteer, or these types of things. So it's a really great conduit to meet other creative people across different disciplines. The other thing that we do through the lab is we do a lot of events. I'm very interested in community engagement. The city of Windsor, it's a little post-industrial city that has a high unemployment rate. The downtown core is really struggling. And so I make these events, I make them for myself as an artist. I think they're really great for communicating with people. I find pleasure in designing these types of events, but I also do it for the city as a way of creating new experiences for people who live in my city. So this is a piece called Feasting the Lab. It is one of the first performances we did in the new lab in the new building downtown. And I'm very interested in bureaucracy around science. So I was thinking about how one day this room is like a room, and then the next day this room is a lab once I have the certification paperwork go through. And it changes what you're allowed to do and the cultural mores and the community standards of that space. So what I did is I threw an enormous party the day before we had the lab certified, and we did everything in the lab that you're not allowed to do in a lab. We drank alcohol in the lab, we danced barefoot in the lab, we just everything I could possibly think of. And then at the end of the night, I had the health and safety officer say, all right, everybody, stop the party, time to go home. We're gonna sign the paperwork. She signed the paperwork, gave it to me, and then it was a lab, and we could never do it again. And so a lot of my work is about using pleasure and joy and creative strategies for exploring these bizarre sort of boundaries of how science moves through our culture and society. These are more documents from that day. I'm in a music department. We had a choir sing us. It was wonderful. It was a great party. We do a lot of exhibits. So I exhibit my own work as an artist, of course. I have one opening in Slovenia next week. But in addition to that, I really like to show the work that our students do because they're phenomenal. And also because this is really cutting edge stuff that is happening. And also, again, because a lot of my students come from Windsor, they have this idea that maybe what the work we're doing in Windsor isn't as exciting as the work happening in Toronto or Montreal or New York. and I like to prove them wrong. So this is an exhibit that we did at the Ontario Science Centre in 2013, where it was the 5-year anniversary of the lab, and we took 10 best student projects over those 5 years, and we gave them a budget to up their game, and then we installed them all at the Ontario Science Centre. And I have to say, it was fabulous. With that project, we also did the Nuit Blanche, which is that 24-hour art festival in Toronto as well. And we did something called the Art in Ecology Parade. And I had a busload of my students come up for Windsor, and we stayed up all night long. And we did this, like, we called it like a night parade through the streets of Toronto, where we celebrated all sorts of organisms that bioluminesce and whatnot. And we had loud music and ridiculous art projects on wheels, and students had art projects that fit into their backpacks. And we ran through the streets of Toronto and told everyone about our work. It was a lot of fun. The last thing that we do that I wanted to talk about is we do host a lot of people at our lab. So we're also like an exhibition venue. There's not a lot of places in Canada that feel comfortable showing this type of work. We have artists in residence who come. So this is a couple of years ago, we had Tina Tarpgarden. She is a choreographer from Copenhagen, and she does all bioart, but dance bioart. And this is a piece she was working on right here at the bottom, where she wanted dancers to perform in a bed of mealworms. I think they're mealworms that are eating styrofoam. They found that that some of the enzymes in the digestive tract of this organism can digest plastics, and particularly styrofoam. So this is really exciting in terms of bioremediation technologies. And she wanted to create this artwork that allowed people to sort of experience this over time. So she came to our lab and did dry run projects with the students and all sorts of testing for health and safety to see how she could develop this project. And it's since been performed in Ottawa and all over the world. How am I doing? Okay, good, 3 minutes. So the last thing I want to say is I just want to tell you about where my research is going, but what I want for you guys to think about as the next generation of scientists and medical professionals. So in 2018, I was awarded a Canada Research Chair, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where that is taking me. My goal over the next 10 years is to devise research and creation methods, artworks, texts, and technologies that serve to engage audience, species, and communities in collaboratively imagining possible biotech futures. So rather than the things that we see on TV, like Marvel comics and that type of thing, that are very like Hollywood driven, very corporate, I want us to together spend some time thinking about what our biotech future could look like outside of those visions. And I want to do it in a way that maybe also is inspirational. I think sometimes we feel just completely locked in and fearful around things like global warming. And I want to start thinking about what are things that we can do to move forward. These futures are going to integrate feminist and post-colonial perspectives on science and biotechnologies. These imaginings of our future are deeply engaged in digital technologies as well as applied biotech technologies. I'm interested in not only looking forward, but I think our future is also going to be informed by our past. So I spend a lot of time looking at historical, agricultural, and indigenous knowledges. There's so much information there that we've sort of like let go because we're so progressive and worried about the technological future. We need to bring some of that with us into the future because there's like a wealth of knowledge that is being lost. I'm very interested in community engagement, and not like regular people who have no attachment to the arts or sciences should also be interested and intrigued by these questions and help contribute to determining what we want our shared future to look like. Of course, we have sustainability on this list. I have to say this was written in 2018. More so, we're in a climate emergency. We need to take action now. This is a very serious situation. We cannot move forward on any of these fronts without always considering what are the impacts on our planet, on how we perform science. So for example, right now in my lab, we're looking at removing all of our disposable plastic from our practices. What are ways that we can do that and still do that safely? The last thing I'd like to say is that the goals of this lab are rooted in notions of love and joy and gratitude, and also the acknowledgement of suffering. You know, I talk about having these relationships with other humans and other organisms in the lab, and it's impossible for those to only ever be positive. If you look in the wild, you know, organisms, as they interact with each other in an ecological format, there is collaboration, but there is also like death and eating one's neighbor. And so we need to think about what are the mutually destructive as well as mutually beneficial relationships we have with other organisms. How can we do that in a way that it is respectful and there's some reciprocity, and even in moments when there's suffering and death, how do we acknowledge that and be grateful for that? So I guess what I want to say to all of you, you know, I've really dedicated my life to these questions, and I don't expect any of you to do that. But what I want you to do as you move forward in your professional career is to avail yourself to knowledge outside of your own field and genre that might complicate, improve some of your own practices and how you move through the world, how you perpetuate science. Ways that you can do that are things like taking options outside of the sciences during your studies, making friends in those classes, have a lifelong friendship with a poet. I'm not kidding, it'll be so much fun and it will impact how you think and feel and work as a scientist over time. Another good example, a lot of my early work I wouldn't have been able to accomplish if scientists had not invited me into their lab. One of my first labs I ever worked in was actually a medical school at the University of Calgary School of Medicine. As a young art student, I was drawing cadavers in the anatomy lab with the science students who were doing their anatomical studies. 10, 15 years later, I got a job in the same lab. I was their AV technician for a period of time. And I used to help them operate all of the cameras when they were doing like teacher training and that type of thing. I have a durational reciprocal relationship with that lab, and they've impacted me as I have impacted their practices over the years. So I highly encourage you to invite art students, and I say art because that's my genre, but it could be like law students, it could be economics students, to come into your lab to see what you're doing, to allow for these commingling of ideas. Because my argument is that one of the firm things that we have learned through COVID-19 is that science cannot stand alone, and that we need to work on these larger questions like disease, but also like, you know, the health of our planet. We need to work on them together across genres. So that is my lecture for you today. I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will make myself available for questions or comments.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Willet, for this really fascinating talk. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I see a lot of virtual applause happening over Zoom. This is great. All right, so you're welcome to put in your questions either through chat, or you can put your hand up and you can unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. So I'm already seeing questions in the chat box. All right, from Adrian, what inspired you to pursue an interdisciplinary field like this? They would love to hear more about your journey.
Sure. So I was an art student, an undergraduate art student at the University of Calgary. And one of our professors, we had a human anatomy drawing class because you had to learn how to draw figures so that they looked anatomically correct. And at the end of the semester, for one day, she took her students into the anatomy lab. And it just changed my life. I was like, it was so profound. It was not just, I wasn't just learning about humanity. I was learning about death, or about anatomy. I was learning about death. I was learning about the life cycle. I was learning about the medical institution. And I realized that even though I was terrified and I was somewhere where I didn't belong, that I knew I needed more of that. And so that was my first time that I negotiated. I went back to the professor and we talked with the School of Medicine, and I negotiated for myself to go down there 10 more times and do these anatomical drawings. And I just had this window into this alternate universe. And I learned that as an artist, you could sort of use your artist card to talk yourself into places that maybe you don't really belong. And so since then I've been doing the same. So I sort of like, and I end up going all over the place. There was a lab in Australia where I learned tissue culture and tissue engineering. I just met some artists and scientists at a conference once, and then they said, well, if you want to come check it out. And I'm very persistent. That's the other thing I'll say is everyone sort of says, I don't know, it's a little expensive. I'm not sure it's a good idea. And I would just like find the money and harass people and call them back 16 times until they finally said, oh, okay, come on in. And it slowly escalated. My first 10 years or so, I was always in someone else's lab. And then I realized I really needed my own lab. And that's when I started getting very serious about applying for jobs that would allow me to build my own lab. And that's what I did at the University of Windsor.
Great, thanks. There was a question from Laylee about how you stay motivated and passionate over the years in academia.
Highs and lows, Laylee, highs and lows. First of all, I will say I am obsessed with bioart. Like I think about it before I go to bed at night. I think about it first thing in the morning. People sometimes comment that that's all I talk about. So I have this sort of like personal obsession / passion with this topic. And it allows me, I'm kind of addicted to this thing. I call it the feeling. Like when you have a really big event, you do this weird party, like that party I hosted to open our new lab. We got the president of the university there and I swabbed him and grew it in like a petri dish. Like I love that feeling. And I'm willing to go through like, 3 or 4 years of paperwork and meetings, because I have to tell you, all the things I do break all the rules of the university. So I have to go and meet the health and safety officer. And she's like, oh, hi, Jennifer, what are you working on today? So it's a lot of that. And sometimes I get really down. I should admit, there is some crying in the bathroom. Projects sometimes get delayed or postponed a few times while I'm trying to get all the health and safety approvals. But I'm just incredibly persistent. And I think I'm a little obsessed with bioart.
Your energy, I can see like the way that you talk and your passion, and it's really like it's really impressive actually, like endless energy.
It's endless, but then when I'm done, like maybe even after this I might have to go lie down. Like we did a very big performance 2 days ago. We have a new space we're opening and we did a virtual performance for our virtual opening, and I have to say I had a headache all day yesterday because I was on fire for like 4 hours nonstop.
Okay, great. But I guess you have sorry, you mentioned that you were persistent, but I guess you had also a good niche, and we say in biology niche or microenvironment. So I guess the microenvironment and the environment and the niche that you have in the lab or wherever you were is also important, I guess. I mean, it has an extreme effect on the decision.
100%. So I'll tell you, first of all, when you're doing really interdisciplinary work, first you have to get used to not belonging anywhere. Like even the artists, if I gave this exact same presentation to the artists, they'd be like, that's not art. Those are science projects. So everywhere I go, I don't quite belong. And it is a little awkward sometimes. Sometimes I end up standing awkwardly at a conference and not knowing too many people. And I just get over that. The bioart community, so there's about 2,000 of us all over the world, and we are tight. Okay. Like I'm messaging them about the thing my kid did on the way to work this morning. Like, that has been a great niche to me. I don't see them very often because we live all over, but there's a very tight-knit bioart community and we help each other a lot. And then at my own university, so when I did my job interviews, I interviewed at 5 or 6 different universities. I got 2 or 3 job offers, and I was also interviewing them because I was like, because there's no bioart jobs, right? So this job is a printmaking job. And I said, if you hire me, I'm going to do this other weird thing. And so some of those job interviews I went to, I could just see they were like not having it. But the one that I took in the end, I could see them during the meeting sort of like leaning in and nodding. And they said, oh, we have that old paper making studio. You could build a lab in there. And that was just, so you're
welcoming. Yeah, very welcome.
So I tend to find, like, even if I meet a scientist who wants to work with me, I almost don't care what their research is. I will find a project that aligns with their research, because that niche, that vibe is almost more important than the topic in terms of having a successful outcome across disciplines.
Exactly. Yeah, it's critical. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. And we have a question from Ed. Ed, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Jennifer, thank you for sharing your perspective and broadening ours. I just wanted to question really and suggest that during this pandemic, messages from governments have been very conservative. Do you think if we meaning the governments, had brought in emotion more into advertising, maybe we could have saved more lives? This is a very serious conversation now.
Yeah.
We're changing a little bit now from the chat room.
Yeah, I think one of the things I thought was really interesting about the messaging during this time, a lot of the chief medical officers across Canada were women. And a couple of them showed emotion during press conferences.
Yes.
And it was like a really key moment. And it was discussed and commented on. I think human emotion should play a larger role in how we communicate and even discuss these issues. And I'm not talking, I think there's also a long held fear of irrationality, particularly of women maybe, you know, being irrational and unable to control their emotions. But I think that, I think by pretending that emotions don't exist, that we are also distancing ourselves. It makes it easier to make maybe decisions that we don't feel as, that would be harder to make. Okay, a good example would be like, think about a research ethics committee. They can make very big decisions about the lives of a lot of organisms. But if they had to be in the same room as the cattle that were being slaughtered for that research project, they might have a slightly different response. And so I think more generally, and I'm not opposed to animal research at all, but I am interested in us having more authentic discussions about these types of things. So I have to say, strategically, I'm not a strategist or a communications officer. I'm not sure if in that instant more emotion would have been the best thing to do, but I do think that we need to invest in decades-long relationships of non-specialists to thinking about science, knowing more about science, so that when something like this comes up, they don't think that science is an opinion, people are making stuff up, it's a conspiracy theory. Like, I think that would give years of traction to people. Like as myself as a receiver of this information, I could see in January the information coming out from overseas. I was like, okay, we need to start shopping. We need to make some different decisions. And I think that if more of the general public had amateur relationships to science, I think it would really change the discussion.
Well, I hope that we've learned something when the next pandemic rolls around, because it's going to. Thank you very much for your insights.
I couldn't agree with you more. My biggest hope is that we've been pushed into this weird state where we're more open. I'm hoping that the efforts behind the pandemic could piggyback onto efforts around global warming, and you know, maybe this is a time where change is possible.
Thanks very much.
Great. I'm going to go back into the chat again for a question from Janella. This is about where you draw inspiration at the early stages of your work. Are there artists that inspire you? And any suggestions of other bio artists to follow?
Sure. So when I was young, I was really into like Leonardo da Vinci, right? This is a very similar kind of thing that's going on there. There's a lot of Canadian artists that I'm really interested in who maybe also deal with maybe domesticity, but also different technologies and stuff, like people like Mary Pratt. I was very interested in, you know, a lot of the oldies but goodies, Egon Schiele, like beautiful. I have to tell you, I'm really interested in historical painting. So I've been to all the museums. I look at all of the old work with the optics, like the Northern Flemish painters and stuff like that. I love that stuff. And historically, science and art were much closer together, I guess is what I would say. Now, bioart, it's everywhere, okay? So there's so much for you to know about. So in Canada, we have my lab, but we also have a lab at Concordia University, which is where I used to work, which built up a bioart community there as well. And they're just working at building one at York University. So a student who came out of my lab who has a really interesting career right now is a woman named Jude Abuzena, and she does amazing work. At York University, Joel Ong is about to start a bioart lab there, and I love his work. He does sound and he does atmospheric studies. So he does projects where he puts petri dishes in the air and then collects the bacteria that was growing in the air and then makes art projects out of them. Concordia University has Dr. Tanny Duff, She does a lot of work out of there. And there's also another woman named White Feather Hunter. So there's a huge Canadian contingent. I think I would like to say that Shirk Funding is a significant supporter of bioart. Bioart is a lot more expensive than other art forms. So Canada has a lot of bioartists that are doing very well because of that type of funding. If you go overseas, like the heavy hitters, the most famous, like there's a woman named Marta de Menezes. She's out of Portugal. She's one of the first bioartists. You've got George Gessert. He did genetic engineering of plants, really great work. Oren Katz and Yonet Zur, they're from a project out of Perth, Australia called Tissue Culture and Art Project. And they're the first artists that did tissue engineering art projects, and they're fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I could go on for hours. There's a lot. If you guys, if you need a reading list, I can send a bibliography to Stephanie if you like.
Great, and we'd be happy to share that with all of the attendees. Thanks. All right, we've got time for maybe one last question. Any final questions for Dr. Willet? All right, if there are no more questions, I see Dana popping up. Dana, did you have a question?
It wasn't really a question. I just wanted to say thank you. It's really, it's a mind expanding thing to think about, is how you blend arts and sciences. And, you know, for some of us who haven't gotten much beyond the social sciences, when we try to blend science and other fields, it's a lot to think about. But thank you very much. It was really a great talk.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations to all of your students for completing the summer program, and I wish you all the best in your future studies and in your research.
Great, thanks again, Dr. Willet.
Thank you.
All right, so we are now coming towards our first break, so I just want to share something quickly before we move on. There we go. All right, so we are now coming towards our first break. It will be 10 minutes. While you're taking your break, you're welcome to check out our program booklet, which contains the summer student study summaries, some program highlights, a message from the program coordinators, and some little goodies here. So we'll be back at 11 o'clock, where we'll start our first session of summer student presentations. So see you in a little bit.